Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video we are going to be talking about the 10 champions in the game that I feel almost made it, in the sense that these champions are not bad in most cases, are definitely useful, has their place in the game, can do fights for you, but ultimately they just landed shy of being those meta champions that people use as go-to and are kind of like the default rank ups and stuff like that. Now, there are a couple of rules for this. I am not looking at a few of the oldest years of the release. I'm basically starting from, I believe, 2018 and upwards. So these need to be newer champions with relatively detailed kits and full set of abilities, unlike, let's say, Iron Man, who basically has nothing going on for him. And also, these are champions that have never gotten buffed, best to my knowledge, because I will make a similar video to the buffs that, well, didn't quite make it, or maybe were on the right track, but didn't, establish themselves. That being said, there is no particular order to any of these, but I will kind of comment on what I would personally love to see changed about these champions in order to make them kind of like established standard default rank ups. We're going to start with Sauron. And Sauron is getting more attention now because he's a 7-star. Let's face it, that's like 1000%. When you pull a 7-star Sauron, you're like, it's not awful. But when he existed at the same level as everybody else on a 6-star level, hardly anybody really ranked him, maybe aside from some defensive rank ups. But even on defense, mutants have been struggling a ton because Nimrod exists. And Sauron is just a champion that effectively kind of has the right stuff, just not the right numbers. Like, with Sauron, I don't think you need to do much else than just, double the potency of his bursts on the light attacks, increase the chance to trigger that, or decrease, or whichever was more helpful. I think the bleed resistance and all of those immunities are perfectly fine. I think he just needs longer lasting degen when you do trigger it, maybe slightly more potent prowesses, and that's it. I really think he is an awesome champion. And a 7-star, obviously, I can already expect somebody in comment sections like, oh, my 7-star Sauron's hitting this card. It's like, yeah, it's a 7-star, but, there's a reason why when 6-star Sauron existed, very few people really invested. For, a full disclosure, like all of these champions, or most of these champions, I took to rank 3 because I kind of sort of liked them, but I never took them to rank 4. And I, at this point, have, 50 rank 4s. So I had like 50 chances to take one of these champions up, but I always passed them. And, there are reasons for it. And Sauron's like all right as he is, but he's just not quite good enough. He would be, I think, great champion released like 3-4 years earlier. But ultimately, over the years, overall quality of the champions has increased. And when he was released last year, he just wasn't competitive enough. He's also one of those champions that, feels well better if you use Liquid Courage Double Edge Masteries, but without them, he definitely seems just incredibly lacking. Moving on, Vision Arcus. And Vision Arcus is one of those sad stories. And again, there are going to be people like, oh yeah, Vision Arcus can destroy, Warlock or something. It's like, yeah, sure, but, we just have better options. He's one of those champions they always classify as good, and just quite good enough. There are people who like him, and that's fair. I have champions that, might not be the best and that I like and that I rank. Like, I have a rank 5 Havoc, which, I believe he's better than many people think, but at the same time I realize that Havoc isn't like the best mutant or anything. And Vision Arcus is kind of like similar story. He's not a bad champion by any means. Has interesting shrug of ability for Sig, for a cosmic champion. That's very interesting, and obviously destroys the robots and stuff like that. And the biggest kind of like irony with Vision Arcus is that for a while, he was good enough. Because Vision was bugged, and you could stack your armor shatters. And with that, two very massive important changes happened to Vision Arcus. Number one, you could have 100% uptime of armor shatter, which is a significant improvement. And that increased his utility. And number two, you had more damage, which is exactly what Vision Arcus needed. And for those couple of months when Vision Arcus was bugged, in my opinion, he would be like, stable mainstream cosmic champion. Now, unfortunately, Kabam did insist on fixing that bug, and we got the original version, which just isn't quite potent enough. I'd say if they do not want us stacking the armor shatters, then they would need to increase like the potency of the armor break debuff, I would say. Increase perhaps the potency of that cold snap, and then have it halved for him as a defender or something like that. And then I think it would work amazing. But as is, yeah, he's good. If you like Vision Arcus, I don't blame you at all. But let's not joke around. It's not like most or half or even a significant amount of top tier players and alliances use him for anything but like alliance for defense. Next champion is Wong. And Wong is a champion that is fun. And again, more people have started paying attention to Wong since he entered the 7-star crystal. Because obviously getting a champion that's at like rank 4 to rank 5, 6-star power level, just out of the gate, you will try to find the best things about him. And, he can work as a defender here and there in some of the metas, and even offensively, some matchups he can do. And the most annoying thing about Wong is I really, really like the character. I also enjoy using him. The problem is the ramp-up time, and also the fact that there's quite a lot of timer watching involved within that ramp-up. And end result is that he's kind of like a homeless guy in Marvel Concept Champions, like a hobo, kind of like Proxima Midnight, where, you really kind of let this champion shine in like really long form content. But even in that long form content, these champions either have their limitations or just better alternatives. And as an end result is that offensively, there is nowhere real good reason to use Wong, especially for a Mystic champion. His only like nullifies are on level 3, and for it to be remotely potent, you need to, spend a lot of time building him up, and you need to throw like 8 special attacks with him to ramp him up properly. If he's awakened, 9. If he's unawakened, it's not even 8 or 9. It's more like 12. Pretty much, because you need to alternate him between level 1s and level 2s to refresh it. If he had either way to refresh his mandalas aside from level 2, that would be super helpful. But I think the bigger problem is that they chose us to go with need to have 3 of each spell. I think if Kabam just made it 2 stacks of each spell, and also gave level 1 an ability to refresh the mandalas if you activate like a second copy, then Wong would actually be a very, very good champion. That would be a similar change what they did to OG Spidey and Shuri kind of combined, where, let's say, if instead of having 3 stacks of each spell, just tune him around, more potent spells, 50% more potent spells, but make it 2 stacks, and then if you activate a second copy of any of these spells, it also refreshes the duration of all the active spells. I think that could work. And I think then Wong would actually be a solid, awesome, awesome champion. As it stands, though, it's fun, but pointless. Aside from like some defensive utilities. Moving on, Purgatory. And I'll admit, Purgatory doesn't really deserve a spot here. Let's face it, Purgatory is just bad. In the sense that there's a lot wrong with her. And I think the biggest thing is how undependable and relatively lackluster she is. Obviously, lackluster damage is one problem, but also the other problem is that all the utilities are tied to whatever classes of the opponent you are fighting. And then even to access that, you need to ramp for a relatively long time. And then it expires if you actually use her. So there are, I think, about 3-4 changes that can quite easily fix Purgatory and make her better, much better. Number 1 is let her acquire her soul abilities, or count that she has collected soul at the beginning of the match, rather than, when 9 bars of power have been filled or whatever. when you enter the match, just give her that soul. It's not like these abilities are that busted. And yeah, so that would be one thing. Second thing is also, let her carry them for rest of the quest. Perhaps limit how many you can collect, limit it to 3, so you can't get like every single one, or just let her, carry them for the entire quest instead of them having it expire after like 2 quests. And then the last bit obviously is, needs slightly bit more damage, so I'd say increase the attack bonus you get from Demonic Rampage, slightly improve how you gain the charges for Demonic Rampage, and Purgatory would be relatively good champion without any major changes. Just make whatever she does more potent, let her access that utility at the beginning of the fight, don't have it expire, and we would have a decent Mystic champion. As it stands now, she's definitely underwhelming entry. Next up is Invisible Woman. And Invisible Woman, again, is a champion that does not need much to be great. And without a doubt, she is the weakest member of Fantastic Four. We have Thing, that's one of the best defenders, one of the best incursion attackers, useful in Alliance War offense as well. We have Human Torch, the best science champion. Mr. Fantastic, easy top 10 science champion as well. Decent defense, decent attack for Alliance War, for Battlegrounds, everywhere. And then there's Invisible Woman. She's just nothing. She's just nothing for no one anywhere. And she does have a lot of cool qualities. And there are just 2 things that need to be changed about Invisible Woman. Number 1, scale down how many of your fragile debuffs you need. Make those fragile debuffs more potent, but go from 50 to 20 and make them 2.5 times more potent. Simple. Immediately would be, much, much, much quicker ramp up. Much more, feasible thing to do. Second thing is, allow her to parry when he's invisible. If you block a hit, sure, or if you would get hit in the face or whatever. Unpause that invisibility, lose that ramp up, but just let her parry. Allow Invisible Woman to parry, reduce her ramp up, and you'd have an awesome science champion. No other changes really are needed. Let her land a parry and shorten the ramp up, and we would have an awesome, awesome member of Fantastic Four. As it stands, though, next up is Red Guardian. Red Guardian is one of the older entries here, and it was also the very first champion that arrived in the game with buff immunity, which I made a big deal about. I personally expected Red Guardian to be much, much more significant than he turned out to be. But as it turned out, we needed to wait quite a long time until this buff immunity feature became more mainstream in science class, and then other champions kind of took his spot effectively. And Red Guardian is a fantastic champion. Again, one of those things where you do not need to change much. One thing you want to do with him is increase his timers, let his slow be slightly bit longer, from 12 to 15 seconds, but most importantly, just increase the duration of that trauma on level 2. If that trauma was realistic to maintain, have that trauma pause during special attacks and, increase the duration of that trauma by a slight amount. How great champion. At the moment, though, there's just no point. Not the greatest defender by any means, and then offensively, there are just better alternatives that do the same things. That's it. Give him a little weeny bit of tweak, and he would be great still, even today. Moving on, Misty Knight. And Misty has, I think, 2 to 3 major problems. Number 1 is Misty has like an awful signature ability. Like, Misty's signature ability is the worst signature ability Kabam has created in the last several years. Because all of these effects have minimal uses in most cases, or no use at all. Like, Misty gains a Fury buff for each bleed debuff currently on her. Well, you don't have bleed debuffs on you or you're dying. The mysteries of X gene elude Misty's super. Okay, so nothing on mutant tech. If the opponent has 2 or more armor buffs when Misty's special attack won't connect, second armor break is applied. Why? Just let her inflict the second armor break. Done. You know? Inflicted disorient debuff decreasing their block proficiency by 5% and defensive ability accuracy by 10% for each unique buff on the opponent. Especially consider. Inflict the suppression debuff, reducing the opponent's combat power rate by 10%. And the worst thing is, at maximum, you can only have like 40% uptime to this ability because you gain it for 18 seconds every 27 seconds. Just shit. It should be permanently active at the start of the fight or after, first 10 seconds or 15 seconds. And the second thing is she just doesn't have quite enough damage. And I think Kabam kind of butched this one because we have guaranteed critical hits and a precision that increase her critical rating by like 69 points per charge. They just need to turn this precision to a cruelty. Because half the point of playing Misty is you get your guaranteed critical hits when you fully ramp her, but those guaranteed critical hits don't do enough damage in most cases, unless you run Liquid Courage Double Edge, in which case she loses a ton of health. It's just change this precision into a cruelty. And then as she continues ramping, your crits get more potent. There are like 2 precision effects, but no effects at all in the entire thing that actually improves her like attack and damage. So, turn this precision into cruelty, and then, you go unblockable, then later you get your guaranteed critical hits, but then also this cruelty would be much more potent because it's calculated per charge, and Misty would be awesome. Nope. We just need a redundant precision that does not matter, because everybody goes for the guaranteed crit. Alright, moving on. Sam Wilson. And Sam Wilson, again, has his use, and I really thought he's going to be much more relevant in the tech scene. Not saying that you can't do things with Sam Wilson at all, but there's, again, very good reason why he's not really seen in, Tier 1, Tier 2 Alliance Wars offensively much, or Battlegrounds top players don't really use him much and stuff like that. And it's just because he's relatively finicky to play for relatively low return. Anything that is in his kit is done better by other champions. You need like ruptures. There are other champions that do not crit. There are better options and stuff like that. He has a ton of very cool things in his kit that made him really pop out to me. He was one of the last champions that I grinded for. I actually missed him, but I did grind for him. And I truly believe that he would be great, but well, number one, his damage is relatively lackluster, but even with that mediocre damage, I think he would still be more popular if he was easier to manage and play. The problem is that there's a ton of things you need to keep an eye out for. When you're locked on is on cooldown, when it's off cooldown, how many armor ups you have, whether you have your bulwark active, and then you need to obviously think about activating that bulwark. Then you need to check your sap charge and everything else. There's just a bit too much with relatively tight margins. I think, increase the duration of his bulwark buff or passive, whatever it is. Make his sap charge and power drain mechanics slightly more effective. And yeah, just help the players to actually use this guy, because even for the fights where this guy's pretty much perfect, as much as I tried using Captain America Sam Wilson because I do have a rank 3, I just ended up getting hit in the face in half of the fights. And that would be normal because, there are champions with larger learning curve. But if the champion has a big learning curve and it requires you to get very accustomed to the champion, there's typically a very good payback, or it's just not worth it. Like, you needed to really get used to Ghost, but it's worth it. You needed to really get used to Tiger, but it's worth it. You needed to really get used to Quake, but it's worth it. And Sam is kind of in the same boat where you really, really need to become comfortable using this guy, managing all the things, and it's not easy because there's a ton of things happening, and it's just not worth it. So, there we go. Then moving on, one before last, we have Silver Centurion. And Silver Centurion is kind of similar. I like the character. Again, I do have a rank 3, and I can understand why some other people do like him, but he's just not good enough in the numbers, in the details. Increase the duration of that slow debuff, so you do not need to, just worry about heavying all the time, especially because it's not as easy thing to do because of his playstyle. And increase the duration of the locked on effect, and increase the duration of the plasmas and stuff like that, and maybe a potency of those shocks and plasmas, and then he basically has everything that he needs to be a good champion. He's just not quite, quote unquote, Kabam's mic term, effective enough. I would say that. Again, I'm sure that I will get a lot of yelling from comment section of people, oh, Silver Centurion is the best champion in the world. Well, he isn't. If he was the best tech champion or amazing tech champion, people would be using him. A lot. Not just some anecdotal examples. And the last one is Icarus. And Icarus is also one of those things where I really like the champion. He's really fun to use. And it's just not good enough. It's a bit too slow. It's not quite potent enough. The whole damage on level 3 after you need to spam a bunch of other special attacks is just not worth it in today's game. With Icarus, it's a bit harder because I'm not entirely sure how you fix that. But any champion where you need to go for like level 1, level 2, level 1, level 3 is just not going to work these days. You need to take that damage distribution from the level 3 and add it somewhere else in his kit. Maybe have the Incinerate be somewhat more potent and then the level 3 mattering less. Kind of make him, more Shuri-esque after the buff. Because after the buff, Shuri is likely going to be very good, which is why I'm not mentioning her. And do similar thing where, the actual Incinerate damage also matters. Yeah, because there's a lot of similarities between Icarus and Shuri. It's just one does shock, one does Incinerate. But I really liked Icarus because, he has Incinerate and shock immunity. He has increased combat power rate basically all the time, so you have access to a ton of special attacks. There's tons of damage over time effects. All that stuff is very, very cool. It's just not quite potent enough and fast enough. So, these are the 10 champions that I consider as like almost amazing. Not saying they're bad, again. I do believe that they have their fans, like many champions do. I do believe that, they have their places to shine. But I also believe that there's a very good reason why majority of the players at, again, tier 1, tier 2 wars or YouTubers or battlegrounds, tryhards don't use these champions as mainstay. Let me know which champions you would add on this list, or how I insulted your family's ancestors by adding some champions that you think are the best in the world. Let me know how wrong I am, and I'll read those comments, I'll promise you. Meanwhile, I hope you guys have a great day, and I'm going to catch you guys soon. Bye! Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about